And bad morning, everyone. Today is October 29, 2018. Welcome to episode 71 of Bad Morning News, where we showcase all the negative news that may or may not be portrayed in mainstream media. And if it is portrayed there, it's probably just in a ridiculously partisan light that's just meant to gin up fear and hysteria among the general population. A couple notes. Thank you to Brave Browser for supporting the show. If you are tired of the typical corporations out there who are selling your information to the highest bidder, give Brave Browser a try. If you download Brave Browser via the link in the description box, it benefits Bad Morning News as well. So thanks to anyone considering giving Brave Browser a shot as well. We are looking for more hosts for Bad Morning News. If you're interested in either this morning show or potentially an afternoon slot at some point, reach out to us in the Discord or in the comments somewhere and let us know. We'd love to have more hosts for Bad Morning News. With that, I'm Cryptic Cynic with you today, and we will jump right into some of the bad news. There was quite a bit of bad news over the weekend and past few days. There's been a lot going on, and I'm in a pretty bad mood this morning. I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of losing my mind with all the stuff coming out now, and obviously with midterms coming up, it just seems like the level of insanity is reaching comical levels almost, but it's not quite that funny. Anyway, this first article is from RT.com, written via Reuters. Sorry. 189 feared dead in first ever Boeing 737 MAX 8 crash in Indonesia. A plane operated by the low-cost Indonesian airline Lion Air crashed while on a domestic flight from Jakarta. It's the first crash ever for Boeing's new 737 MAX 8 model. It has been confirmed that it has crashed, Yusuf Latif, a spokesman for the Indonesian Rescue Agency, said, as cited by Reuters. The plane was on its way from the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, to the city of Pangkal Pinang on Sumatra, a flight slightly longer than an hour. Latif said that the jet lost contact with air traffic control 13 minutes into the flight and crashed into the sea. The plane requested an emergency landing almost immediately after it took off. Sindhu Rahayu of the Air Transportation Directorate General said at a press conference. He added that the authorities lost contact with the plane after the request. The plane was packed with 189 passengers and crew. Indonesian National Search and Rescue Agency said at least 23 government officials were on board, Reuters says. Flight tracking service Flight Radar 24 says the preliminary flight data shows a drop in the plane's altitude and increase in speed before the transmission was cut. The plane appears to have plunged into the sea just off the coast of Indonesia. Data provided by the service shows it was reportedly at an altitude of 3,650 feet, about 1,112 meters, when the signal was lost. The plane was built recently with about 800 flight hours. The head of Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, Dr. Suharjanto Djajono, said Lion Air has confirmed that the plane was airworthy and piloted by an experienced crew. Its pilot and co-pilot had clocked in 11,000 flight hours together. The common number of flight hours for a pilot in a year is about 1,000. The authorities will not speculate on the cause of the tragedy until the black box is retrieved and they receive a recording from an air traffic control post, Djajono said, as cited by the Straits Times. The newspaper reported that the plane could have carried about 20 finance ministry staff. It is too early to talk about the exact causes of the tragedy, but the photos of the debris appear to show that it was a pretty high-speed impact. Aviation safety expert Hugh Ritchie told RT. He added that the aircraft model enjoyed a good reputation as highly reliable and was sought after by most of the carriers globally. Debris from the plane, including seats, has been found floating in the Java Sea near a facility belonging to state oil firm Pertamina, a company official told Reuters. Sailors on a nearby tugboat were reportedly the first witnesses of the crash. A search and rescue operation has been launched with divers sent to search for possible survivors in the submerged wreckage. A video showing numerous vessels approaching the apparent crash site has been posted. No survivors can be seen in the footage. The first images purportedly showing debris scattered in the sea have appeared on social media. The agency's officials say the plane submerged at a depth of 30 to 35 meters, adding that the rescuers located the debris about 3.7 kilometers south of where contact with the aircraft was lost. Photos circulating on social media also appear to show passenger belongings and torn pieces of the plane's fuselage recovered by rescuers. The plane had a technical issue on a previous flight, which had been resolved according to procedure. Edward Serrate, the chief executive of Lion Air Group, said. However, he declined to specify the nature of the problem. Flight JT610 is operated by a Boeing 737 MAX 8, capable of seating up to 210 passengers. It is one of the newest Boeing models, which just entered service in May 2017. Flight Radar 24 says the plane was delivered to Lion Air in August. And an update to the story says that officials are now saying they fear everyone is deceased that was on this plane. They're not really hopeful about finding survivors given the scattering of debris and unfortunately of human remains. And as the article mentioned, it was likely a high speed and from a high altitude crash, and unfortunately, it's pretty unlikely that people would survive that type of plane crash. And that's the end of that article. I guess this just broke yesterday or last night, but it's kind of ironic for me seeing this story. I've been kind of addicted to watching a lot of documentaries about plane crashes lately, and so to see this story come up and a lot of the things mentioned seem very similar to a lot of stories I've heard. I've seen documentaries on about a lot of plane crashes where this plane apparently it was just a few minutes after takeoff it was requesting an emergency landing and then lost contact, and apparently most plane crashes occur either shortly after takeoff or shortly or around the time of trying to land. So as well as crashing from a high altitude and at high speed, a lot of the aspects are similar, and it is interesting that this is a new plane, I suppose, according to the article. So it'll remain to be seen if there is any technical issue with the plane itself. But unfortunately, from what I've seen from a lot of past plane crashes, it's usually a lot of factors and often includes human error. So we'll have to see what happens, and definitely have people who lost somebody in this crash. It's plane crashes are relatively rare given the amount of people who do travel by plane every day. But of course, it's scary. It's scary to think about for a lot of people, even if it is rare. And again, many plane crashes are quite fatal, and it's not likely for people to survive them. And with that, check the comments here. Bad morning, everybody. Bad morning, Danielle and Daniel. Daniel says, bad morning, and you aren't the only one feeling that way today. That's good. It's not just me. I woke up this morning just feeling negative and almost not wanting to think about the news, and just feeling like a lot of things are just kind of over the top at this point. But I can get into some of that later. Danielle says, uh-oh, yes, it is highly unlikely that anyone survived. Yes, unfortunately, it seems to be the case. With that, I'll move on to this next article from RT.com as well. And there's no specific author. Right-wing Bolsonaro wins Brazilian election in landslide despite mass protests. Jair Bolsonaro, the right-wing candidate from Brazil's Social Liberal Party, or PSL, has won the presidential election runoff, beating Fernando Haddad of the Workers' Party after a campaign riddled with controversy. With 99% of the ballots counted, Bolsonaro, dubbed the Tropical Trump for his populist rhetoric, is ahead with 55.1% of the vote. His main opponent, left-leaning Haddad, is trailing with 44.9%. Bolsonaro, a former army captain, has become a polarizing figure in Brazil because of his anti-LGBT, sexist, and racist remarks. He has represented the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil's Congress since 1991. The 63-year-old politician easily won the first round on October 7, finishing far ahead of the field with an overwhelming 48%. While it was not enough to secure the presidency in the first round, polls predicted a problem-free runoff victory for Bolsonaro. His history might have gone the other way if popular former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva had not been banned from running for office in early September. The Workers' Party founder, known simply as Lula, is serving a 12-year sentence for corruption. However, before his presidential bid was rejected by the court, Lula was leading the polls. Bolsonaro's all but certain victory in the second round has sparked a vibrant protest movement that has seen thousands of women taking to streets to say ele não, or not him in Portuguese. Many of those who staunchly oppose Bolsonaro's ascent to the highest office point to an array of controversial statements he made through the years and which he never recanted. A military man, Bolsonaro saw virtues in the dictatorship that ran Brazil in 1964 to 1985, saying in an interview in 2016 that the dictatorship's mistake was to torture but not kill. His scandalous remarks on homosexuals, rape African Brazilians, women, refugees, who he once branded the scum of the earth, have resurfaced in the media, making international headlines. Bolsonaro has come to power on the promise to fight corruption in a country that has been plagued by high-profile scandals in the recent years, as well as on the back of a liberal economic program. Bolsonaro vowed to reduce public debt by 20% through privatization of public companies, carry out pension reform, and lower the age of criminal responsibility from 18 to 16. Even before his election, Bolsonaro appointed banker Paulo Guedes to lead a newly established economic ministry that would combine the current Ministry of Finance and Planning with the Ministry of Industry and Trade. An advocate of gun rights, Bolsonaro has proposed loosening gun ownership laws and threatened to unleash a war on drugs in Brazil. And that's the end of that article. This, I guess, has gotten a lot of attention in the past couple days at least. I've only started to see news about this election and this Bolsonaro guy a couple of days ago. Glenn Greenwald on The Intercept lives in Brazil, and he's been putting out a lot of articles about a lot of the controversy over with what Bolsonaro has said in the past. I don't know too much about all of it, as I said, I haven't been following it for a very long time, but from what I've read, he does seem similar to Trump in some ways. He seems to be this kind of reactionary character in a way to having had to the country having had a lot of leftist rule in the past several years, and I guess people are tired of it and want to try something different, and are gravitating towards another populist type personality who's I guess outspoken, if nothing else, in a similar way to Trump, and a lot of people, I guess, like that, and they like the strong man idea of somebody who will come in and fix the corruption, which again is another uh, parallel to the 2016 election, where a lot of people were just tired of politics as usual and the typical establishmentarians out there and establishment candidates, and voted for Trump even though he's, a reality star. But they were just so tired of the typical people who've been running things in Washington that they were willing to try Trump, and that kind of seems similar to what's going on here. Although, like, apparently Bolsonaro has been in politics for a long time, and it's kind of interesting how it says if Lula, a former president of Brazil, wasn't now serving a 12-year sentence for corruption, that he may have had more support with the Workers' Party. But that just kind of shows how the situation is there. If there people are looking to somebody who's in jail for corruption, if it's between this guy in jail for corruption or a guy who's more of a right wing type, it is kind of similar in some ways to what's going on in the U.S. Just you know, having just crappy people on both sides, and people just trying to hope for any glimmer of hope within someone who's going to assume the office of the presidency, whether that's in Brazil or here or in the U.S. or wherever. That seems to be happening a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting just reading some of his positions here, where he apparently favors trying to cut Brazil's debt, and even wants to loosen gun ownership laws, but then he also supports launching a war on drugs in Brazil. Even that is kind of similar to Trump, who ostensibly is supportive of Americans owning guns, but at the same time is heavily invested in law enforcement and the war on drugs. So, I mean, I think that's the unfortunate state that so many in the world are in, where it's kind of a lesser of two evils thing. You get, one guy with some good and some bad, and the same on the other side, and it just comes down to, are there any glimmers of hope? And I guess if nothing else, I would hope that obviously I just wish the best for the Brazilian people, regardless. And I don't know what effect this guy will have. I'm not qualified to speak too in depth on him, but it looks like. I mean, then even the protests are similar to what's going on in the U.S. with obviously the resistance with Trump, and now it seems to be a similar parallel in Brazil with a lot of people who, um, you know, who support different groups of people, and apparently he's said really negative things about, just things like that, just same kind of just cultural divide, and unfortunately the division is not helpful for anyone, I don't think, but that's where so many places in the world are, it seems. And I'll try to check the comments, see if there's any comments. Yeah, so I don't know if any of you know any more about Bolsonaro or this election, but Apparently, Bolsonaro just won the election, and Trump has called to congratulate him and everything at this point. And I guess I'll just definitely be following to see what happens and to learn more about him and Brazilian politics as well. With that, we'll move to one article from theactivistpost.com. This one is written by Ryan McMakin. Europe's war on free speech continues. A European court has ruled that people can be fined and prosecuted in criminal court for saying things about religious figures, specifically saying things about the Muslim prophet Muhammad is verboten and state punishment is appropriate. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled a woman convicted by an Austrian court of calling the Prophet Muhammad a pedophile did not have her freedom of speech rights infringed. The woman, named only as Mrs. S., 47, from Vienna, was said to have held 2 seminars in which she discussed the marriage between the Prophet Muhammad and a 6-year-old girl, Aisha. Mrs. S. was later convicted in February 2011 by the Vienna Regional Criminal Court for disparaging religious doctrines and ordered her to pay a fine of 480 euros plus legal fees. The court's primary reasoning, it appears, is that the woman's comments ought to be condemned because they might, quote, stir up prejudice and threaten religious peace. Notably, however, Mrs. S. is not accused of saying anything that encourages violence, either generally or in any specific way. In other words, human rights go out the window if the exercise of those rights might cause other people to feel bad. This sort of thing is shocking to Americans, of course, but it's old hat by now. In Europe and Canada, where one can face large fines and even imprisonment for saying unpopular things, just some examples include a candidate in the European elections was arrested in Britain for quoting a passage from Winston Churchill about Islam. Geert Wilders, a politician in the Netherlands, was tried on 5 counts, including criminally insulting Muslims because of their religion. Both Mark Steyn and Ezra Levant were dragged in front of the Canadian Human Rights Commission on charges of being Islamophobic. Moreover, it reflects a larger disdain for private property that is so widespread in Europe. Consider that the comments made by the woman in question were apparently made at 2 seminars. Presumably, no one who didn't wish to listen to the ideas of Mrs. S. was forced to do so, and there is no claim that Mrs. S. trespassed on anyone's property to express these ideas. As noted by Murray Rothbard, the right to free speech is not a special right, but is intimately connected to property rights. If Mrs. S. was expressing her ideas in a place and in a way that did not violate anyone else's property rights, then she was acting peacefully and in a way that respects the rights of others. In other words, it appears that there was no coercion or violence of any sort involved in Mrs. S.'s expression of her ideas. The court, however, has decided that the proper response to her peaceful activities is to use violence by imposing fines. That's the end of that article. As I'm sure many of you know, this isn't new for Europe and Canada, but apparently this woman tried to appeal her case. It's been several years that she was initially convicted by an Austrian court, but apparently the European Court of Supposed Human Rights upheld a conviction for her expressing an opinion, and that's just Orwellian in itself. That would endorse punishing people for speech is pretty bizarre. But in the world we're in today, where many people are out there trying to equate offending people with speech, and they're trying to equate that with physical violence. Unfortunately, these cases will probably only increase because if you see the use of speech as equivalent to physical harm, then you're going to have a bad time, and you will be able to justify this type of thing, just punishing people, fining them, or potentially worse in some places, news that might upset some people. And even if it upsets people based on a religion, she's not even calling for violence or anything like that, but expressing an opinion about it. So there's really nothing, just no legitimacy to this at all. It's just really bizarre. And unfortunately, lots of people in the U.S. are trying to move things in that direction as well, since the U.S., luckily isn't quite there yet with punishing people for free expression or free speech. But if things continue the way they are, it may not be far off. So, unfortunately, we'll keep seeing these stories. I will check comments here. Let's see. Danielle says she should accuse them of misogyny. That would fix them. Yeah, that's a good question. Again, it's like an oppression Olympics where, the court is going out of its way to protect people's feelings because of their religion. So, a lot of times those same people will go out of their way to, give special credence to people because they're women. In this case, you would think that would buy her some oppression points, but I guess not in this case. And Danielle says maybe he and Trump will have a good working relationship, referring to Bolsonaro. Danielle says soft Sharia, here we come. Danielle says, I heard this morning that free speech is totally dead in Europe, now in favor of the adoption of Sharia law. Is that too much or just truth? Daniel says it's not quite that far gone in the UK. Can't speak to all of Europe, but it's getting worse. And Danielle says, what about Christophobia? Seems like that is more prevalent these days, along with anti-Semitism. Danielle says we aren't as far there except on social media platforms. Yeah, I guess so. The social media platforms out there are trying to be the first ones in the U.S. at least to usher in this widespread deplatforming and essentially censorship of people who they think say mean things about others. And that's a good segue into this next bit of an article. I'm not going to read this entire article, but this is part of a blog from Reason.com, written by Elizabeth Nolan Brown. Social media selectively blamed for threats and violence. On Saturday, a man opened fire at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue, killing 11 people while shouting slurs about Jews. According to the online trail he left behind, the shooter, 46-year-old Robert Bowers, identified as a member of the fringe conspiracy group QAnon, and disliked Donald Trump because he thought the president was a globalist, not a nationalist, and beholden to Jewish interests. Bowers sometimes posted these and other anti these and deranged anti-Semitic comments to the social media platform Gab, which says it has been working tirelessly with the FBI and DOJ on this case over the past 2 days to ensure justice is served. Meanwhile, information about the online life of the, quote, MAGA bomber has also been trickling out. Caesar Sayok Jr., the 56-year-old man behind last week's wave of pseudo pipe bomb mailings, was apparently quite active on Twitter and Facebook, where he posted increasingly out of touch and anti-democrat screeds and memes for years before sending at least 14 potentially explosive packages to prominent liberals such as the Clintons, Barack Obama, George Soros, and Robert De Niro, the New York Times found numerous instances of Sayok sending Twitter threats, and at least one person reported these threats to the company, but was ignored. In contrast, Bowers, despite many distasteful posts on Gab, does not seem to have directly threatened anyone before going on his murderous rampage. Guess which social media platform is taking more heat? Despite the fact that Twitter and Facebook are just as quote unquote complicit in enabling Sayok as Gab is in giving voice to Bowers, payment processing companies have not been pulling their services from these social giants, and supposedly enlightened liberal voices haven't been calling for their demise, yet Gab is getting both. Web hosting company GoDaddy dropped Gab, giving it just 24 hours to find a new host or be disappeared from the web. As a result, Gab has temporarily gone down. The company posted the following statement yesterday: Gab.com is under attack. We have been systematically no-platformed by app stores, multiple hosting providers, and several payment processors. We have been smeared by the mainstream media for defending free expression and individual liberty for all people, and for working with law enforcement to ensure that justice is served for the horrible atrocity committed in Pittsburgh. Gab will continue to fight for the fundamental human right to speak freely. As we transition to a new hosting provider, Gab will be inaccessible for a period of time. We are working around the clock to get Gab.com back online. Thank you, and remember to speak freely. Since Saturday, cloud company Joyent, payment processors PayPal and Stripe, and blogging platform Medium have all ceased doing business with Gab. When a site is allowing the perpetuation of hate, violence, or discriminatory intolerance, we take immediate and decisive action, said PayPal spokesman Justin Higgs in a statement. Gab's temporary demise has spawned gleefully idiotic gloating from certain progressive and anti-fascist circles, which seem unconcerned that Gab is getting different treatment than its more entrenched and established competitors. Gab has a reputation as a Trump-friendly platform and has long attracted anger, revulsion, and mockery for embracing the alt-right and anyone shunted from other social media sites. Gab's treatment this weekend, compared to the treatment of bigger and just as hate-filled platforms, make it abundantly clear that this isn't actually about stopping, quote, hate speech or holding social platforms accountable so much as shutting down a disfavored platform. Those cheering now won't be doing so for long. The more that web platforms and tools are treated as synonymous with the speakers of the content they broker, the more that radicals, right and left, social justice causes, and marginalized communities of all sorts will be shut out of the conversation. And that's the end of that section of the blog. So apparently Gab has been tweeting in the past couple days that they've been working with law enforcement, and some people on Twitter were commenting that they even were trying to work with law enforcement, and they still got the shaft with many of these companies that were working with them and now have decided to ditch them. And sorry about this background noise outside. Let me know if it's too loud, but I'll try to go on with the show as much as possible, or for as long as possible. So yeah, this story, again, it just shows the hypocrisy, given that so many of other people in the center of stories regarding shootings or whatever types of things, of course, have Facebook pages, have Twitter accounts, and often have posted threats in some cases, and apparently, no one blamed Facebook or Twitter for giving them a platform. And at times, people have reported it, and it went unnoticed somehow, even though, as many know, that people are getting kicked off Twitter and Facebook for just hurting people's feelings and not making actual threats. So all of this is just getting really crazy, and that's part of the reason I'm just feeling overwhelmed with the level of just things going on, like the shootings and this male supposed bombing thing, and I don't even know what to really think about it. I mean, on the one hand, it could be just crazy people. On the other hand, it's suspicious timing. Why is this all happening all at once, like within a week? There's the male bombs thing, and then now there's the synagogue shooting, and then apparently this morning there was another shooting at another high school in North Carolina. So I don't even really know anymore, and it seems like all of this type of news just ends up driving people further into the arms of government, where they demand more intervention, whether it's leftists calling for more gun control and banning of certain types of rifles, or if it's Republicans, playing on, or Republicans then counter accusing Democrats of making up things like the mail bomb thing. It's just all such a clusterfuck at this point. I really don't even know which way is up, unfortunately. But unfortunately, this just has no benefit for any of us who just want to live our lives, essentially, and just causes chaos, and will just be another factor driving people to vote, which will probably do nothing. And that's what's disappointing to me is so many people looking into government for solutions. It's again the Hegelian dialectic problem reaction solution, and that just seems to be happening on such a large scale lately. It's just getting really overwhelming, as well as of course the typical back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, each accusing each other of using rhetoric that's inciting these things, and there's just so many layers of like what is going on, who's benefiting from all this chaos and hypocrisy and whatnot. It's so much to process at this point. Danielle says, so where are the repercussions for Twitter and Facebook? Waiting. Yeah, exactly. Max, good to see you, Max. Max says social media and academic institution censorship serves to normalize acceptance of such action. I agree. Danielle says, and they wonder why there isn't more preemption of these atrocities, right, Max? Danielle says, yeah, right, unless it is Twitter and Facebook, then it is just fine. It is about oppression by the left. Danielle says, one nut brings out the other nuts. Yeah, I agree with that. It's just kind of this tit for tat thing, just constant back and forth reactionary things, and just daily at this point. With that, I'll move on to this article from antiwar.com. This is written by Jason Ditz. U.S. Army's Iraq War study remains unpublished years after completion. It's been praised by a number of top Army officials privy to it, and many think it's vital to make clear the lessons learned in the disastrous occupation of Iraq. But the United States Army in the Iraq War study remains unpublished and may never see the light of day, with officials citing the need to, quote, relearn many of the lessons of Vietnam at the start of the occupation of Iraq. General Ray Odierno commissioned the study in 2013. By 2015, it was completed and had been compiled into a 2-volume document. Most Army officials on the record say it should be public, and some in Congress are also pushing for the completed document to finally be released, yet there is a quiet resistance from senior leadership at the time who are worried a report that declared the war largely unsuccessful will make them look bad. The Army's current position is that the study is not an official history, but that it would be published by the Army War College in the future. Whether it becomes publicly available then is uncertain, though it is clear that some simply prefer that the war's failures remain unspoken. And that's the end of that article. So there's apparently a study that the military, the Army even did on its own actions with the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, I guess. And it's been completed for 3 years and has not been released because many people in Congress, admit that it'll make them look bad, probably. And I think it's really telling that the article says the Army's current position is that the study is not an official history, but it would be published sometime in the future. Whether or not that means it'll actually be publicly available. But yeah, like the line "not an official history" is funny because, of course, uh, the official history will, never, hardly ever admits wrongdoing on the part of the military and the government. So I'm sure the quote unquote official history, they'd never want anything that shows them in such a negative light to be the official history. It'll just be, the official history that gets put into kids' textbooks in the future will just be the same, empty garbage that really doesn't tell anyone anything about the truth of, all of the military excursions, the military-industrial complex, and the real motivations behind all of this going on. I certainly didn't learn anything of substance with regard to military history in public school myself. And, of course, that's not what they'd want to be an official record. They only want, things that fit the national propaganda narrative to be the official history. So at least they're admitting it. So, that's good, I guess. Okay. Let me know again if this background noise gets to be too much. I might have to end the show early if it gets too loud. Yeah, Danielle says yes. Max says agreed. With that, I will continue. This is from the Free Thought Project, written by Matt Agrist. Parents outraged after school shaved hair from kids' heads to drug test them. Students in a Kansas middle school were humiliated after officials removed large chunks of their hair to comply with the school's drug test policy. Phillipsburg, Kansas. The parents of children at a middle school in Kansas are likely regretting their decision to allow the school to drug test their students this week after their children came home with large patches of missing hair. The hair was used in the random drug testing process of 11 to 14-year-old children. The school district is now on the defensive after multiple students complained to their parents about the hack jobs they received as the state searched their bodies for illegal substances. Hopefully, the situation allows the parents to realize the error of their ways and take note of what happens when you ask the state to parent your children. Superintendent Mike Gower spoke to KWCH and said the district recognized the problem of officials cutting large sections of children's hair out and is addressing it. According to KWCH, Gower said the district started random drug testing last year after parents voiced concern about middle and high school students using drugs. They requested the hair follicle testing because it can show whether someone has been using drugs back 90 days. Gower said the company usually takes 100 to 120 strands of hair, the diameter of a pencil, Instead of a tiny bit of hair, however, kids had large sections of their hair removed to test for drugs, a frightening notion indeed. According to Kansas.com, the district requires students and parents sign a student drug testing policy at the beginning of each school year if they want to participate in or attend school-sponsored activities. According to the consent form, Gower said that this is the district's second year with that policy. The school board is now apologizing to the students and parents for this sickening display. I'm not going to throw the company under the bus or the board or anybody else, said Gower. I'm the superintendent. What happens here is on me. I apologize to those kids and those parents. We're taking steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the end of that article. So essentially just the latest in dystopian public school authoritarianism. Kids now having their hair cut to test them for drugs, not based on any specific suspicion, but just, school-wide policy, because parents, apparently some parents were calling for the school to take action, and this is what happened. So, as the article says, I think people really needed to take responsibility for their own kids and not look to state schools to do that, because that'll only end in horror and total violation of individual liberties, and teaching kids that they're just cattle to be used and abused in whatever way in the name of protecting them. And that's not what anyone should want kids to grow up learning and believing. And but that will only happen if parents allow their kids to be treated that way at public schools. So unfortunately, these stories are coming up more and more, as I'm sure you all know. And just another reminder that public schools are, basically prisons for most kids this day and age. If it were up to me, I feel like most kids are probably better off, being homeschooled, even in a really non-formal way, like unschooling or whatever. Not to disparage, homeschooling or unschooling in any way, just to say that even if their parents aren't the best at it, it's still better than being interned in schools all day. So that's just my thoughts. But let's see. I'll hit up some comments here. Danielle says, seems to me that if parents are concerned, they should deal with it privately. Otherwise, leave the kids alone. It isn't a school thing. Yeah, that's a good point. Alright. So I had one more story, but the landscapers are getting really close now, so I think the background noise might get to be too much within a couple minutes here. So I'll actually probably have to end the show a little early today. Apologies for that. But yeah, it wouldn't be really worth it if there's a bunch of noise going on. But I'll cover, pick up where I left off tomorrow morning, and I'll have to end it there. Apologies, but thank you all for being in the chat here and for listening. And just a reminder, if anyone's interested in becoming a host for Bad Morning News, give us a shout out in the Discord or comments. All the links from today will be in the description box after the show finishes uploading to YouTube. And with that, this has been episode 71 of Bad Morning News. Apologies again for cutting the show a little short here. That's just kind of how luck of the draw that I get this time of morning. Sometimes there's landscapers out right near where I am. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. If you have any other comments, let me know in the Discord. I'll be around. Remember, screw the state, fuck the system. Have a bad morning, everybody.